Where we start is here in Washington, D.C. tonight. And I swear this trip was not planned to coincide with this big political development. But sometimes you just get lucky. Tonight we can report that the presidential nominee for the Republican Party in 2012 will not be Republican Chairman Michael Steele. I repeat, the nominee will not be RNC Chairman Michael Steele. Mr. Steele confirming to ABC News that he will not seek the presidency in 2 years. When pressed for some reason on the matter, Mr. Steele said emphatically, "How many different ways can you spell no?" ABC says they were just asking what they described as an inevitable question about his 2012 intentions. The inevitable question of whether the Republicans would run Michael Steele for president. Wow. Nobody knows who the Republicans are going to run in 2012, but in the lead up to this year's elections, the Democratic president regaining his momentum seems to have disoriented the Republicans on policy. Republicans are now frequently voting against things they used to support. Today, for example, there was this from President Obama.
I've proposed a bipartisan fiscal commission, a panel of Democrats and Republicans who would hammer out concrete deficit reduction proposals over the medium and long term. I should point out, by the way, that is an idea that had strong bipartisan support, was originally introduced by Senators Gregg on the Republican side and Conrad on the Democratic side, had a lot of Republican co-sponsors to the idea.
You know, it did, in fact, have a bunch of Republican co-sponsors until President Obama endorsed the idea. Then all of a sudden, Republicans started to think of it as a bad idea. 6 Republican senators who originally co-sponsored forming a deficit commission voted against it once President Obama signed up for the idea. Sam Brownback, Mike Crapo, John Ensign, Kay Bailey Hutchison, James Inhofe, and John McCain. Profiles in courage against their own policies. But it's not just the deficit commission idea. This keeps happening over and over again.
That's also why we're restoring pay-as-you-go, a simple rule that says Congress can't spend a dime without cutting a dime elsewhere.
Now, not everybody loves pay-go, but it is credited with why we had balanced budgets and even a surplus under President Clinton. Republican Senators John McCain, George Voinovich, Susan Collins, and Olympia Snowe all endorsed pay-go in recent years. But then, political crisis. President Obama endorsed it.
When the vote comes tomorrow, the Senate should restore the pay-as-you-go law that was a big reason for why we had record surpluses in the 1990s.
Despite supporting pay-go before, now that President Obama is for it, John McCain, George Voinovich, Susan Collins, and Olympia Snowe all voted against it when it came up for a vote last week. You noticing a trend here? And it's not just economic issues. Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham, once sponsors and major supporters of cap-and-trade climate legislation, now say they oppose it. On national security, Republicans had no problem with the Bush administration trying terrorism suspects in federal courts. Now that President Obama is doing that same thing, they've decided they're against that, too.
We now know that was a mistake.
We didn't say it was at the time, or even think it was at the time when President Bush did it, but now that President Obama's doing it. Even on taxes, Republicans are now opposed to the one thing we thought for sure they were definitely for.
We cut taxes. We cut taxes for 95% of working families. We cut taxes for small businesses. We cut taxes for first-time home buyers. We cut taxes for parents trying to care for their children. We cut taxes for 8 million Americans paying for college. I thought I'd get some applause on that one.
Not this year. Republicans not in favor of tax cuts anymore. Not if they're Obama tax cuts. Let this serve as a standing rebuttal to anyone still arguing that this president just needs to support more Republican-friendly policies and then he'll get some Republican votes. This president is not just supporting Republican-friendly policies, he's supporting actual Republicans' actual policies. And the Republicans are voting no against their own ideas just to stick it to him. While health reform still simmers in the background, the next item on the president's agenda is, of course, financial reform. Thanks to Sam Stein at Huffington Post, we've got the Republican strategy memo for trying to defeat that. Included in the words that work section of the memo, quote, "We don't need another federal government agency." Frank Luntz, the Republican strategist, notes, quote, "The single best way to kill any legislation is to link it to the big bank bailout. Thus, Republicans should rename Wall Street reform the Big Bank Bailout Bill." Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Barney Frank of Massachusetts. He, of course, is chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. Mr. Chairman, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming
Thanks, Rachel. Great to have you in town.
You have seen the Frank Luntz memo, the Republican blueprint for trying to kill Wall Street reform. What's your reaction to it?
Well, first of all, it includes one major lie. He apparently gave people choices as to what was their biggest reason for being against the Consumer Financial Protection Agency. It's focused on trying to stop the agency to protect consumers from credit card abuses, overdraft abuses, payday lending abuses, etc. And one of the choices is it means another bank bailout. They are totally unrelated. The Consumer Financial Protection Agency is a standalone section of a larger bill. By the way, we, in our bill, put an end to the bank bailout policies. Go back to your original theme, by the way. One of the striking things about the Republican Party is on January 21st, I have to quote my partner Jim on this, we had one of the worst mass disease outbreaks in American history. Widespread amnesia struck the Republican Party. Everything that had happened before January 20th, 2009 disappeared from their minds. Unemployment, deficits, the financial crisis, and the bailout. I was going about my business trying to do some financial reform when, in September, the two top Bush administration economic appointees, Ben Bernanke, who before Bush made him chairman of the Federal Reserve, was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under Bush, and Henry Paulson, a very decent guy, came to us, the Democratic and Republican leadership, and said, we need to do this bill. By the way, I should go back a step. On the Tuesday of that week, Mr. Bernanke and Mr. Paulson came to us and informed us, they didn't ask us, that they had decided to provide money to AIG. That was a Bush administration unilateral decision. They then came back 2 days later and said, would you vote us $700 billion? We said, well, here's what we'll do, because you have announced that the world will collapse if we don't do it. And frankly, I think they were right that there was terrible trouble. But when the two top presidential appointees come and tell you that if you don't do this publicly, there'll be a collapse, then there'll be a collapse, because confidence is so important. So we were the ones who insisted on putting some pay controls on there. You're going to have Ken Feinberg on later. We also said, no, you can't do the $700 billion all at once. You got to do it in sections. If you look at the way it was administered under President Obama, it was administered in a much fairer way. Moreover, because of some of the things we did, we put restrictions in there about repayments so that where the banks are concerned, not the auto companies, but where the banks are concerned, we made some money. The one thing, when Mr. Luntz talks about don't support a consumer agency because of bailouts, let's be very clear. Every single activity of the federal government that's considered a bailout, AIG, the TARP for banks, the automobile companies, everything was done by George Bush. And it's just astounding that they say no. Now, the other issue is he talks about the loopholes in the consumer agency because some entities were exempted. Yeah, by Republican votes. What happened was in a few cases, a minority of Democrats voted with a majority of Republicans to exempt them. We still cover almost everybody. So the fundamental thing is to say that a consumer agency is linked to the bailout. It's just a lie. It's just made up.
Well, is there a Republican counterproposal? I mean, it seems clear to me, just in pure politics terms, that if this was a bill to say Happy Mother's Day to the moms of America, the Republicans would be opposing it and saying it was going to be a socialist dictatorship dawning from sea to shining sea. It seems like they've got to say no to anything, no matter what it is. But is there a Republican counterproposal on financial reform?
Well, there is on the consumer agency. It was. Right now, by the way, we are creating a new agency by taking power away from existing agencies. Consumer regulation now is done by the Federal Reserve, the control of the currency, who's the bank regulator, and other regulatory bodies whose main job it is to keep the banks healthy. We have found them to have done a lousy job, so we want to take it away. The Republican proposal was to take all of those agencies that are doing a bad job and have them come together as a council who would then do a bad job. But the thing on the Republicans' financial reform, here's the key. The answer is, when they got serious, no. They unanimously voted, the Republicans in the House, for zero additional regulation. No more regulation of derivatives. No more diminution of the excessive leverage that the banks have owing too much money. We, in our bill, curtailed the power under which the Federal Reserve gave money to AIG. It's Section 13.3 of the Federal Reserve Act that lets them give money out in unlimited ways. We put an end to that and put some severe restrictions going forward on a different proposal. When the final vote came in the House, and people know the procedure, it's called the motion to recommit. It is the minority's right to offer whatever they want. And they offered a motion to recommit to the financial reform package that said, cut off the TARP, but of course we've stopped giving out money under the TARP. They didn't want us to use some of the TARP money for job creation.